New York's ambitious climate law, how to make it work and save $75 billion. This is Leonard Rodberg. Last year, New York passed an ambitious new climate law. I want to tell you briefly how it works and how to make it work better. First, let me tell you a bit about myself. I was trained as a nuclear physicist. I worked on nuclear arms control in the State Department in the 1960s. And in the 70s and 80s wrote about the benefits of renewable energy. For 35 years, I taught public policy at Queens College, including teaching a course on climate change. Like many of you, I believed that renewable energy, especially solar and wind, were the answer to climate change, and that nuclear energy was too risky and too expensive. For the last several years, I've looked intensively into how we should respond to climate change. What I've found is that I was wrong about both renewables and nuclear energy. Here I want to tell you what I've learned about the situation in New York State. We all recognize that the issue of climate change is serious. It's getting warmer by the decade and will continue to get warmer until we respond to it. We have to act, and we have to act now, seriously and smartly. It is generally understood that we have to eliminate the burning of fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas, which generate the greenhouse gases, mainly carbon dioxide and methane, or natural gas. Further, it is widely believed that we have to replace them with renewables, like wind, solar, and water power, which emit no greenhouse gases when they generate electricity. A major question is what should be the role of carbon-free nuclear power in responding to the climate crisis. This is highly controversial because of widespread concerns about nuclear energy, but nuclear power is an important part of our energy mix today, including here in New York State. Here's how New York produces electricity today. First, fossil fuels, oil and natural gas, account for about 41% of the electricity used in this state. Nuclear power supplies almost a third, and renewable energy, a combination of water power, wind, solar, and biomass, the burning of wood and trash, accounts for the rest. Water power is the largest of these. Wind and solar in particular account for a little less than 5% of our total electric output today. Remember, though, that electricity is only a part of the energy we use. Our cars and trucks burn oil, and we heat our homes and buildings with oil and gas. So in the overall picture, solar and wind account for just about 2% of our total energy output today. The current New York State Energy Plan, on the other hand, focuses completely on renewable energy. The 2015 plan is the most recent until this new law was passed. You can see that it focuses on the generation of electricity from renewable sources, mostly sun and more recently wind. Nuclear energy does not appear at all in either the 2015 energy plan, nor is there any mention of it in the new climate law. And yet it is a major source of our electricity today. The new climate law sets as its first goal that we should receive 70% of our electricity from renewable sources by 2030. In 2018, the most recent year for which we have data, we got 26% of our electricity from renewable sources, with wind and solar providing 4.6% of the total. Water power and biomass can't grow very much, so wind and solar have to increase over tenfold by 2030 to reach the 70% renewable goal. And this is assuming that there is no growth in electricity demand, like for instance from electric vehicles. To do this, we would need to install 8 million rooftop solar units. We now have about 120,000. Or 2,500 solar farms, of which we have about 50. Or 2,500 offshore wind turbines. Currently, there are none. The only offshore wind turbines around the U.S. are 5 installed off Block Island, Rhode Island. The total cost of any of these, or any combination of them, would be about $100 billion. And we still wouldn't have power when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. At this point, there's no way to store this energy for days at a time, or weeks, or even for a season, like from summer to winter. So is this even doable? Is it possible to reach that goal of 70% renewable? Well, the Citizens Budget Commission, a group of the major business, financial, and healthcare leaders of the state, doesn't think so. It concluded that to meet the law's goals would require an immense scaling up of renewable capacity, and that this was not likely to be feasible by 2030. That's a conclusion that I clearly agree with. So here's a better plan that improves on the one embodied in the climate law and costs a lot less. This one counts the state's existing nuclear power plants among the carbon-free sources of energy. It doesn't rely solely on wind and solar to provide our electricity. If we include nuclear, we meet our 70% goal with only the governor's current offshore wind program, which is just beginning to go under contract. The only new cost would be for that wind program, which will cost about $25 billion over the decade, not the $100 billion that would be required for a totally renewable plan. However, the nuclear part of this plan is in danger. The Indian Point nuclear plant is on the Hudson River, about 35 miles north of the city. Today, it provides more than a quarter of the downstate region's electricity and over 80% of its carbon-free power. It has been providing this around the clock since the mid-1970s. However, it is due to be shut down starting the end of this month, not because it is not working well, but because of unnecessary fears raised by opponents of nuclear power. It has been claimed that this plant will be replaced by renewable energy. However, to replace the output of just this one nuclear plant with renewables, New York would have to quadruple its current wind and solar capacity. That is clearly not going to happen in the next few years. Indian Point will, in fact, be replaced not by renewables, but by 3 or more natural gas burning power plants, that is, by fossil fuel plants. This will lead to the emission of between 12 and 15 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases every year. One of the major fears that opponents of Indian Point have raised has to do with the idea that a large-scale evacuation of the surrounding area would be needed if an accident were to occur there. Experience around the world, including at Fukushima, shows that this worry is completely false. The only deaths at Fukushima were caused first by the tsunami and then by the evacuation itself, which fatally disturbed many frail elderly. No one died or would have died from radiation from the plant. Many analyses and the rules set by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission show that the only real area where evacuations might be justified would be within 1 to 2 miles of the site, where very few people live. Beyond that, people living downwind from where the accident might have happened would just be asked to stay indoors for a few days. So finally, replacing Indian Point with gas will make it even harder to reach our greenhouse emission goals. The climate law says that we should reduce our emissions by 40% from their level in 1990. In 2014, they were down from about 13% from 1990 levels. I've projected it to this year when they may be down by 16%. If we shut down Indian Point, we'll be back where we were in 2014. Achieving the 2030 goal becomes even more difficult than it already is. So my general conclusions are, first, we need to take climate change seriously and have an energy plan that will work. Second, New York's energy plan has to include all its carbon-free sources, including nuclear power. Third, Indian Point should remain open and continue to operate, providing carbon-free power for the state. And fourth, without Indian Point and the other nuclear plants in the state, which are currently scheduled to be shut down in the coming years, we will not be able to meet our state's emission reduction goals. Thank you for listening. If you would like to review the slides used in this presentation, this last slide will give you a link so you can download them.